Hey everyone, it's good to see you guys. It's good to see you. I hope your groups are well. Um, as you know, we're talking about goals. All right, that should have been somewhat apparent just from last week or this week, and the massive slide right there. I had a goal once. I did. Thank you. So I had. It's like an inception goal. It was a goal within a goal. Most of you knew that, or some of you know that I ran a marathon back in 2014. Now, a marathon is 26.2 miles. I ran it. It was in Buffalo. I ran it with a friend. He ditched me at the halfway mark and just kept going. It was fun. But I had a goal, and that goal was to remain hydrated, to stay hydrated during this race. And so I had some issues with that in training, and so I was like, I'm really determined to make sure that I stay hydrated. So here's what I did. I ordered a running utility belt, a fuel belt they call it, and it had water bottles on it. So I had Gatorade and water, and then I had my family and friends scattered throughout the race course, and they had backpacks full, so I could, at any point when I passed them, ditch empty ones and grab new ones and click them in. It was really cool. It was like Batman. And then I knew where the water tables were. I knew how the water tables were, so I could get. If I could describe my marathon experience, it was running while sipping water almost the entire time. And so I make it across the finish line just over 4 hours, which was kind of a goal of mine, which was pretty cool. I wasn't claiming that I was super fast, but I just wanted to get it done in about that time. And my mom had an ice cold chocolate milk there waiting for me because I was like, I got to liquefy my cells. I got to stay hydrated. That's the goal. So what I want you to hear is I had a goal, and I put some plans in place to achieve said goals. So I made sure I had the utility belt, and I had my family and friends stationed. I knew where the water tables were, and I had the chocolate milk waiting for me at the end. So I succeeded in my goal, right? I was hydrated. Thank you. Now you might be saying, Brian, wait, where's the evidence? Where's the proof? Well, no, I cannot show it because I don't have it. But maybe some of you know this, but immediately following the race, like seconds after I drank that chocolate milk, I projectile vomited. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. Ed Martin was there as my witness, 2 hands on a garbage can. It was like a fire hose. And everyone, all the onlookers were horrified at what they were viewing as I just let it rip. And so, turns out your body, it actually has like a fuel, a water conservation kind of mode it goes into when you do any kind of athletics like that. And so you could say, did I hydrate? Yes, I did. I did it probably a little too much. And so that was my one and only goal, executed nearly flawlessly. We're in this series called Goals, and over the course of this month, as you know, we are attempting to uncover the truth in the church that God has given us all that we need, including Himself, to see to it that we can dream big, plan hard, and work to achieve goals that both honor Him and do what we call advance His kingdom forward, so that other people would know God as we know God. And what we hope that you walk away with tonight is this understanding that you were designed for God-sized goals. You are designed for God-sized goals. Last week, Wendy kicked off the series, and we began investigating a familiar biblical account to some, and to some others, not so much. It's the story or the account of Nehemiah. It's a book that we find in the Old Testament, and it's written by a guy, you called it, Joseph. Yes, no, Nehemiah, of course, Emma. So, before we even open up the word, and if you have your Bibles, that's a cue. You can go ahead and meet me there in Nehemiah. Before we even do that, this account takes place 140 years after a pretty significant moment, and that moment is that the nation Judah, that had the city Israel, Jerusalem in it, was completely just make sense of this when it goes online. Was completely ravaged. So they were overtaken, their walls were pushed down, their gates were burned, the temple was destroyed, the village was pillaged. That rhymed. And then the people were put in exile. I was trying to describe exile to middle school students, and I don't know if I did it right, but it would be like people, a nation coming in, taking over the city of Canandaigua, taking us and moving us someplace else, like removing us from our homes, our livelihoods, our communities. That's what happened here. So 140 years later after this event, we find Nehemiah's timeline, and that's where we are going tonight. Now, one thing I should mention. God had told the nation, the Jews, the Jewish nation, Israel, that if they disobeyed him, if they dishonored him, these things were going to happen. They were going to be destroyed. They were going to be exiled. These things were going to come true. And when God says something like that, you got to kind of believe it because it always happens. But he also made another promise that when and if that happens, that God will bring them back together one day, and that the land that was now ruined will become complete and whole again. So Nehemiah begins, and some of God's people, 140 years later, have now began to make their way back to Jerusalem. But as they look for ways to rebuild it, they're just overwhelmed by their memories of loss. It seems hopeless. It's a long adventure. The pursuit is painful. So here enters Nehemiah, a passionate Jewish person who had a dream of seeing Jerusalem restored, but he saw a pretty big problem with that. And the problem is that although some of God's people were now living in Jerusalem, the city walls were still in shambles. Now, what's the practical reason why you would want a wall around the city? Keep bad guys out, yeah, for protection. And then that is true. And the second one is that there was a spiritual problem with it. Leaving it in shambles was only symbolic of kind of their idolatry with God, of not listening to him, going in the other direction, because God said, if you do those things, this is going to happen, and that's what happened. And so there's a physical element, and there's also a spiritual element as well. So inspired by his love for people and his God, Nehemiah set a goal so big that we can only describe it as a God-sized goal. It's a God-sized goal because it's something that only God himself could really help pull off. And the goal that Nehemiah set that was given to him by God was to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem so that God's people would be protected, but that God would also be honored and the Jews could worship God as they originally intended to. Now, I don't know about you. I'm the type of person that won't watch any movie that's in black and white. I have just this feeling that it's such an old movie that it lacks depth and there's no CGI, there's no action. I don't want any part of it. I know some of you will push back because some of your favorite movies are those movies. But there's just something about me. When I think of something in the past history, it's less than what we can do now. And there's an element of truth to that. But when I read this story as a middle school student, I thought like the wall that they were building was like this high, could keep a rodent out or something like that. But the more I looked into this, like this was an impressive goal. It was a 2.5-mile wall around the city of Jerusalem. 2.5 miles. It was 25 feet tall. And back then, they needed kind of thickness to keep the height up. And so it was 22 feet thick. 22 feet thick, 25 feet high, 2.5 miles long. That's insane. This is an enormous undertaking. This isn't Nehemiah walking in, like stacking some bricks and being like, we're good, let's come back. It's an enormous undertaking. So it's fine. So we see that Nehemiah dreamed ginormous, dreamed super big, and set a God-sized goal. But how was he going to do it? Well, Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 4. This might be a refresher to some here. It says this. Nehemiah says, when he hears about what's going on in the city of Jerusalem, he says that he sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned, fasted, and prayed to the God of heaven. And then if we flip over to verse 11, he says, O Lord, hear my prayer. Listen to the prayers of those who delight in honoring you. Please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put it into his heart and be kind to me. In those days, I was the king's cupbearer. So I want us to take a couple of things away real quick before we move on into the count a little farther. It's that Nehemiah kept God in the details every step of the way. He began with prayer. He then moved into fasting, and he spent time just listening, and I love that. God was in the details, every detail along this kind of God-sized dream. But Nehemiah, what he was praying for wasn't for step-by-step instructions on how to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. He knew that God wanted him to lead this kind of courageous charge to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and that was enough. You'll notice he wasn't praying like, God, would you just like bring a drone with some blueprints of the wall to kind of give me a head start on what I should do, and then if you could bring an army of people that could help me rebuild, like that'd be pretty cool, and that'd be nice. No. he had initiative. He was emboldened by his faith in God and this God-sized dream, and he just starts planning. He has kind of starts using what God has already given him, and he just gets going. By the time he reaches the end of this kind of time of prayer, Nehemiah's wheels, man, they've already been spinning. A plan has been formulated, and the God-sized dream has been put into motion. And he asked God to help him be successful in all that he was going to attempt to do, because all that he was going to attempt to do was all for God, which is pretty cool. And I love the last thing. He kind of puts this in there. It was this title at the time. It's that he was the cupbearer to the king, which is kind of a junky job. If somebody was going to kill the king by poisoning his food, the cupbearer would get kind of killed first, which wasn't helpful. But this is helpful information because it reveals to us that he's kind of taking inventory of the people that he knows. Like, he's got some powerful people kind of in his circle of trust, one of them being the king over the kingdom, which I think is pretty neat. Point one that we could take away from all this is that Nehemiah planned while he prayed and listened to God. I love that. Nehemiah planned while he prayed and listened to God. So if you have your Bibles open, Nehemiah chapter 2, we're going to start in verse 1. We're just going to read a few verses, talk about them, and then I really do encourage you, if you've never read the story of Nehemiah in its entirety, and you're not currently reading anything, this is a really fun, historical account of what happened in Nehemiah, and so you should totally check it out, and I think it would be good for you. Verse 1, chapter 2. Early the following spring, in the months of Nisan, during the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I had never before appeared sad in his presence, so the king asked me, "Why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled." Then I was terrified, but I replied, "Long live the king! How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." The king asked, "Well, how can I help you?" With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, "If it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." The king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked, "How long will you be gone? When will you return?" After I told him how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. I also asked to the king, "If it please the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors in the provinces east of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls of the house for myself." And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. Look, I'm no biblical scholar, okay? There's some words I just don't know. And a lot of words are in English I don't know. Stop judging me. I'm feeling very attacked up here. Thank you. Let's take a moment. I didn't even shovel my driveway this morning, and here Nehemiah, man, takes an opportunity that he had been waiting for and planning for and just went for it. The king asked Nehemiah, "Why do you look so sad?" And I don't know if you ever had that time with your parents or anybody, like a friend. There's something going on, and they ask you the question, and you have the opportunity to be honest, and it's going to be like, it's going to kind of show your cards, kind of put you out there. It might be embarrassing, could be conflicting, and you can choose to lie and say you're fine, or you just go for it. I don't know if you ever had those moments. And Nehemiah, man, he just goes for it. He has an answer prepared, and he tells them why he's upset. And then the king responds and asks, what do you want to do? And so Nehemiah, he has a request prepared. And then the king wanted to know, well, how long is the rebuilding and this journey going to take you? And Nehemiah has a timeline laid out. And so since the king has been pretty receptive to all of this, Nehemiah's like, okay, this is going a little bit better than I thought. Hey, could you actually do a couple more things? Here's all these things I need to make all of these things happen. And then if you actually read on, the king actually gives him an army to help bring him to this place, which I think is pretty cool. But what I love and what I hope you caught throughout this process is that Nehemiah continued to talk to God throughout this entire thing. But he didn't wait for God to begin to do the hard work. He used the strategic mind that God gave him to plan and prepare while he waited for the right opportunity. And then when God brought the right opportunity to be, with courage and boldness, he steps out in faith And because of all the preparation that he'd done, he puts things into motion. Because Nehemiah had prepared in great detail for the opportunity he hoped he would get to speak with the king, when God arranged for that moment to happen, Nehemiah was fully prepared and he took full advantage of it. We could sum all of this up by saying Nehemiah prepared while he planned. Nehemiah prepared while he planned. So Nehemiah already had a plan in place, but he was not going to be able to help rebuild 2.5 miles of wall that's 25 feet tall, 22 feet thick, all by himself. That would take him probably a little bit longer than he told the king. So he needed some other help. And if you read on in the rest of chapter 2, you'll see that he goes into the city, he does some recon, he's quiet with who he tells what to, and then he goes and he finds some people and he says, look, man, the city is in ruins. We are, what does he say here? We are a disgrace, but we can no longer be that way. We can pick up some shovels and get to work. God has given us the okay to begin to do that. And that's exactly what happens. The people he was talking to said, let us start rebuilding. So they began the good work. So I kind of jumped ahead a little bit just because I want to make sure we have some time as we begin to kind of conclude our evening. But I want to just recap what we've seen so far. God gave Nehemiah a huge task, a huge ask, and it was to rebuild a massive wall all around Jerusalem that would help keep it spiritually and physically safe in a way. But God also gave Nehemiah everything that he needed to actually make this happen. Nehemiah had full access to God through prayer and through fasting and through listening. He took advantage of that. Nehemiah had his God-given talents and abilities and his passions, and he took advantage of that. Nehemiah had all the resources, the opportunities, and the connections that God had given to him, and he took advantage of that. And he also now had the help of other people, and he took advantage of that. Although Nehemiah's God-sized goal probably was daunting and overwhelming often for him, Nehemiah didn't give up or wait around for someone else to handle it. Instead, he just continued with the plan. He continued going, as you'll see throughout. There's some obstacles, some opposition that comes his way, but he's so dead set on this God-sized goal that nothing shakes him from it. Although Nehemiah's goal was extraordinary, ginormous, he understood that really the tools he needed to accomplish said goal had already been given to him, and he got to work. Nehemiah trusted that accomplishing this God-sized goal was exactly what God was wanting for him and exactly what he was made to do. Now here's where the rubber meets the road. It gets a little crazy for us in here. Just like Nehemiah, you and I were created in the same image of God that he was. You and I are given access to the same abilities and passions and connections and people that Nehemiah had access to. In fact, you could argue we have greater access to different tools that Nehemiah never had access to. You and I were designed for God-sized goals too. You and I were designed to do things just as much as Nehemiah was designed to do things for God. So I know that hopefully you're not currently building a wall around your city. That would be illegal and possibly pointless. But the question we can ask ourselves is, what are we doing? What are we doing for God right now? I mean, that's a legitimate question. That's a tough question. That's a hard question. Because if I stop and think about my past week, I have put 99.9% more energy, thought, and focus into the Buffalo Bills, no joke, than I have to God. Like, that's been my week. I've been so focused on the Bills, I have not even been focused on God. And so that's a really hard question. What are we doing? What are we building? What I want you to know is any goal that you have set before, whether it's a God-sized goal, something that God has given you, or something you've seen in Scripture that you need to go and do, or whether it's just, trying to finish a marathon hydrated, all of those things are being achieved because God has designed you to do both big and small goals. You have a brain that can imagine. You have a brain that can dream, a brain that can strategize and think and lay out timelines. You have people in your life that can help you accomplish any of the dreams or goals that you've set. You have already developed incredible skills, and you have resources at your disposals that you can use to get goals accomplished. And then what's so cool is if you give your life to Jesus, all of a sudden, all these things in our lives that God gives to every single person on this planet Earth amplifies tenfold. And all of a sudden, you and I have hearts that can love so much more than we could ever love people before. We have courage that we didn't know we had because God is in our life. We have assured confidence that exceeds fears and anxieties and worries. We have forgiveness that's extended to us that can free us to take bold chances and to leap out in faith that we never thought we could do before. Listen, God designed you to do big things, big things. And like we talked about last week, try asking God, what are those things that he is calling you to do? Now, I don't want us to think, I want us just to get something under the same thing here. I'm not making any sense. Thank you. I want to say something. Nehemiah's goal was ginormous. I will never build a wall 2.5 miles long. But I think I could possibly still honor God to the same level that Nehemiah did with my life and my skills, the same way that he did. And that's the same thing for you. Loving your neighbor is really hard. It's really hard, especially if they don't believe the same things that you believe. If they don't speak to you the same way or love you the same way, loving your neighbor as yourself, that's a command by Jesus. He gives to you and I. That's really hard. That's a God-sized goal, man. That's huge. You need God to be able to do that. To give away things for the sake of others, that's really hard, to humble yourself and to be generous like that. That's a God-sized goal. To honor your mother and your father in this day and age, that's a God-sized goal. You need God in your life to help do those things. To not covet what your neighbor has. To not be jealous all the time of what other people have. Or to not be, whether it's a glutton or to not be a greed, or to not lust. Like, those are God-sized goals that he's setting before you that we need him on. So what is it that God is giving to you even in this moment? What's that goal? Maybe it is just stepping out and loving your mom and your dad for a time that you haven't in a long time. Or maybe it's loving your neighbors yourself. Or maybe I think of like Maddie Taylor. No, Maddie, yeah. You helped lead the Claim Your Campus thing over this summer at the flagpole. And that was so cool. Like, I love that you guys have taken the initiative and you've seen that, man, our schools are better when we're praying over them. And so let's gather together. I know it's kind of been almost impossible during COVID era, but let's gather together in the atrium. Let's just pray over our school. I love Flower City Work Camp story. It was just a couple of people that saw in Rochester, man, there's a huge need in these homes. So let's just get some people together and we'll go in and see if we can just help a house or two. 35 years later, year after year, they're helping 50, 60 homes at a time, and they're ministering to the community in ways that politicians are seeing, that police force is seeing, that firefighters are seeing. NTS camp, something else that we're also a part of, same thing. Just a couple of people got together and said, hey, we could do a summer camp for our teens that we love, and maybe it could be impactful. This was 20 years ago, and now they're all over the United States, and our lives, some of your lives have been changed by just a God-sized dream to just go out, plan, strategize, and do, and I think that's just so stinking cool. So whatever it is that God is giving to you tonight, whatever it may be, there's 4 things that you need to know that you have always with you that's super helpful. The first one is you. You have you with you at all times as you're attempting to complete or set out to accomplish a God-sized goal or something that he's given to you to do. You have a mind that can think, plan, strategize, make wise choices. You have a unique blend of skills and experience and knowledge, and God has given you specific interests and passions, which I think is so cool. So you have you. And then the other thing that you has that's also important is you have others. So there's you and then there's others, because others really matter. Friends and family, trusted adults, teachers, coaches, mentors. Allowing others to come into our lives gives us greater access to all the experiences and the skills and the resources that we would need to make that happen. I don't know if Nehemiah actually knew how to build a wall, but I think he probably knew how to get people on the scene to help him start it, to learn from them. They didn't have YouTube back then, but maybe that would have been something that he could have used. You have others, you have things at your disposal. I see all of us with our phones not out, but we have phones. And I think something that we forget is the power of communication, man. Communication really matters. And right now, you could send an encouraging message to somebody that would completely lift everything for them. You have your phones. You can do things even with your phones. You can be kind with your phones. You can love with your phones. When God gives us a God-sized goal, ask, what do I need and where can I get it? Everyone's God-sized goals are different things, but maybe for you need more money to accomplish the goal that God has given to you. And so you can seek how to get it. You can pray to God and ask him to give you wisdom on where that should come from. Maybe it's supplies or an audience or a location or an opportunity. So you've got others, you've got things, and then lastly and most importantly, you've got God. You've got God. Whether your goal is an everyday you-size goal or once in a lifetime, build a 2.5-mile long wall goal, God is with you just like God was with Nehemiah. God isn't necessarily always going to give you the step-by-step instruction on how to do the things that he's calling you to do, but he will be right there in all the details as you plan, as you prepare, and as you execute. Take the initiative. The world is hurting, and they need to see the church rise up and to be obedient followers of Jesus Christ, to take bold faith, out in courage, and to just do. Sometimes I think we spend too much time waiting on answers from God. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I've seen a lot of people really get hung up on the whole college decision. What do I do with the rest of my life? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Just pick something that's going to honor God and go for it. And then when you're 30 and you want to change your career, go for it. Like, as long as God is the center of the details and he's always there and you're recognizing that he's always there, that's what matters, I think, most. So go out, be bold, do, dream big, get at it for God, and I think you will honor him and people will be drawn closer. So what are you going to build with what God has given you? Let me pray for you. If you have questions, talk to Will Cooper, and then we'll be fine. God, thank you for my friends who've gathered here tonight. As we look at the account of Nehemiah, I love how we can see something from 3,500 years ago, and it can be super relevant, and we can take so much away, and we can be encouraged by other people's faith in you and how they stepped out, how they took risks, how they realized that life is so much more than just the person staring back at us in the mirror. That when we get outside of ourselves, when we see a world that's hurting, when we invite you into our lives, you give us a heart that just loves people the way that you love them. And there's a lot of opportunity to see your kingdom advanced here in Canandaigua, here in Honeoye, Bloomfield, Victor, wherever we may reside in our homes and our communities. The world needs to see you moving. And so I just pray that you would give us the courage to do that you would cement in us God-sized dreams. And if we're unsure of what those are, maybe we just start by reading your gospels. We just start by reading your word and we listen to your commands and we take those commands as our first God-sized dreams to love our neighbors well, to honor our moms and dads, to respect each other, to not lust, to not be greedy, but to be generous and to be kind and selfless. God, help us to do those big things that are really hard to do, but are so necessary for those individual day-to-day things. God, we love you so much. Thank you that you can meet each and every one of us uniquely where we are. And we just pray all this in your name. Amen.